I received a letter from the $1 Million Roundtable, which is an organization that represents the top sellers of insurance in the United States. And the letter said that I was being invited to give an address to their convention. There would be 30,000 people there at the Anaheim Convention Center in California. A colleague of mine was looking over my shoulder as I was reading the letter, and he noticed in the next paragraph it said that immediately following my speech, there would be an address by Colin Powell. And my friend said, man, that's got to be a lot of pressure. And I thought about it, and I said, well, not really. I said, this man is a 4-star general. He is an immigrant. He's had a true rags to riches story in America. He's an American hero. He can take it. So when I got up to speak, and I knew Colin Powell was still back in the green room and would be watching because he was coming on next. And I told that story, and of course it got a big laugh at the convention center. So he was in Detroit about 3 months later to address the Detroit Economic Club. And we were at a cocktail reception, and I had been asked to introduce him. And I said, I got such a big laugh out in Anaheim, I'm going to use that same story to introduce you tonight. He said, not to worry, Mort, I'm using the same speech. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm honored to be here, and I remember Pearl Harbor, and I don't mean that in the sense that we all remember Pearl Harbor. I remember Pearl Harbor. I was 5.5 years old when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. I know you're all oohing and eyeing, he can't possibly be 90, but I turned 90 the 31st of July, and I'm very grateful to still be able to play tennis. I play tennis with somebody that you know, Ron Fritzmeier, who is a retired Navy admiral, 1-star. And when I first met Ron, I said, Ron, I don't know a lot about Navy ranks, but I said, I think I might outrank you. And he said, oh, really? I said, yeah, I was Air Force. I said, you're 1-star? He said, yes. I said, I'm 3 stripes. He didn't buy it. The elderly gentleman lived in a nursing home. His name was Fred, and he was quite sweet on Mildred, who lived in the room across the hall from him. And one morning, Fred knocked on her door, and he said, Mildred, today's my birthday. I bet you can't guess how old I am. She said, well, I bet I can. No, you can't. She said, come on in. Fred, take off all your clothes. Well, Fred thought she was kind of cute anyway, so he took off all his clothes and laid them out on the bed. And Mildred said, now, Fred, I want you to turn around slowly 3 times. And he did. She said, now turn around the other way, real slow, 3 times. And he did, and she studied the old guy, and she said, Fred, you're 96. By golly, that's the most amazing. How did you know that? She said, you told me at breakfast this morning. We forget. And that's why we have events like this, to remember. To remember how much blood has been shed to preserve the freedoms that we enjoy and the liberty that we enjoy. And we need also to remember how rare those freedoms are in the world in which we live. I was in Cuba doing a story. I had a national network show on the Talk America network for a brief period of time. And they decided it would be a good idea if I did a couple of my shows from Havana. Things were not too good between us and the Cubans at that time. So we had to kind of do this, not exactly using the normal, well, we were there illegally, actually. And we were working with a CNN correspondent who also did work for the Washington Post Company. I worked for the, I got to tell you a cute story. I'm going to digress right here. I just got back from a cruise, Spain and Portugal, and one of our stops was at a winery, And the people who owned the winery put on a big dinner for us that night, and I happened to be seated next to a gentleman that I had seen on the boat. He was a businessman from England, and a very proper gentleman, but extremely conservative. Hates the Liberal Party, the Labour Party in England, and was very vocal about it. And then he got on to the American media. He didn't know who I was. And especially he was hard on the Washington Post. He could not stand the Washington Post. Well, as the evening wore on, he finally turned to me and he said, "And Mort, what did you do?" I said, "Well, for 22 years, I was a national correspondent for television for the TV division of the Washington Post Company." He spent the rest of the evening backpedaling. But we became friends, and we've actually stayed in touch with each other. And he said, "You've given me a great story to tell." I said, "Well, you can believe I'll be telling it." In Cuba, I was at the home of the CNN correspondent, and her two children were watching television. It was before school, and they were watching cartoons on a Miami channel. And I said to her, I said, "Marie, I thought it was illegal to watch U.S. channels." She said, "Oh, it is." I said, "How do you do that?" And she said, "Come here, I'll show you." And she took me out on the patio, and I looked at what I thought was a grill with a cover on it. And she lifted the cover, and it was a satellite dish. And she said, if the authorities knew that I had this, she said, I'd be in jail. So would my husband. I said, "Well, how about your children? They're about 7 years old." I said, "Don't they go to school and talk about what they've seen in the cartoons?" She said, "Absolutely not. These kids know that they can never, ever tell anybody that they've watched American television." How many times when we turn on our TV do we appreciate the freedom that we have to watch television, to listen to radio, to go to the computer? Despite all the misinformation and the junk that comes across that little machine, how blessed we are to have the freedom to listen, to talk, to assemble, as we are doing here tonight. It's a freedom that is not enjoyed in so many parts of the world. It's rare. When I was in China, our guide on the bus would be very free and very open on the bus, criticizing the government. And he once told our group, he said, "Don't ever ask me a political question when we're off the bus, because I never know who's around. I never know who might be a spy." But he said, on the bus, he said, "That's my safe spot." And I thought, when we were in Shanghai, we saw these beautiful homes, and many of them gated. And I said, "Who lives there?" And he said, "The officials, the mayor." And I said, "Well, this is a communist country. How do these officials afford?" He said, "Well, it's just like in America." He said, "It's corruption." He said, "That's a word you folks understand." And I said, "Yeah, I'm afraid we do." You remember Moshe Dayan? Great general in the Israeli army, and eventually I think he became, I don't know if he ever became their prime minister or not, but he was very high up in the government, recognizable by the eye patch because he had lost an eye in one of the Israeli wars. And he also had a reputation for having a rather heavy foot on the accelerator. And one day Moshe Dayan was driving down the road at a pretty good clip, and a young policeman pulled him over, and as soon as he got up and looked through the window, he realized that he had just pulled over this great Israeli hero. He said, "General, do you know how fast you were going?" And with his dry wit and great sense of humor, Moshe Dayan said, "Son, I have one eye. I can watch the speedometer or I can watch the road, but I can't watch both." We live in a time when there are so many things to watch and so many things to watch out for. We were talking at the table just a few minutes ago about journalism and the state of journalism today. And I think all of us have to be our own editor, because there's so much out there that is unedited. When I worked in the TV business, and before that in the radio business, you didn't go out live and start reporting on things. You filmed it, and you came back to the studio, and there was a process. where the assignment editor, the assistant news director, producers, fellow correspondents would look at your material, and it was collegial, and a lot of eyes had seen that to check it both for accuracy and fairness before it went on the air. You don't get much of that today. Today, everybody is out in the field and they're reporting live, and often with limited information and sometimes incorrect information, and there is no process by which the stories can be vetted before they go on the air. That's only one of the issues that we face. The other one, which we were discussing at the table, is the fact that it's so much cheaper to do political commentary than it is to actually send reporters and producers and camera people out to cover stories. And so we don't have a lot of news coverage today. We have a lot of opinion on both sides of the spectrum and in between, but we don't have the kind of solid journalism that a democracy depends upon to make informed decisions. We're just not getting it. And it requires all of us, particularly with the stuff that comes over the internet, to become sophisticated and knowledgeable and careful in what we vet for ourselves, because everybody today has to be his and her own editor. There was a wonderful book that came out after the war between the states. It was called A True, Factual, Fair, Honest, and Unbiased Account of the Civil War, as seen from the Southern point of view. Every one of us brings to life our experiences, our education, our training, all of the things that have happened to us that form our point of view. I'm doing some work now for the Winnebago Motor Coach Company because they found out that this 90-year-old dude was going to travel around the country in one of their motor coaches with his cat. And they thought that was pretty neat, so they've hired me to do some videos for them and some speaking also. And one of the assignments that I had on this last trip, I just did a 7,000-mile trip with my cat. And people said, "You went alone?" I said, "No, I went with my cat. We all know how useful they are in an emergency." But it was a great trip, and one of my assignments was to interview people at RV camps, RV parks, with this question: is our country as divided as the media and the politicians picture it? And almost to a person, the answer was no. The answer was no, that when we sit around the campfire at night, when we go to our impromptu cocktail parties, we find there's more unites us than divides us. We talk about our families, we talk about our careers, we talk about our travels, we talk about our pets. There's a real America out there that is being fed the notion that we are hopelessly and helplessly divided and split. And we're not. Now, we have differences. And we all see things from a point of view. But I propose that if we're going to heal the divide that is there and it's real, and it gets whipped up by politicians and media every single day because it means more votes for the politicians, it means more money and ad revenue for the media. But you and I have within our circle of influence the ability to heal that breach. And we're the only ones who do. And we can only do it by doing something that I learned as a very young reporter, that the key to success as a reporter is not reporting, it's listening. It's listening. Little boy went to his grandfather and he said, "Grandpa, can you make a sound like a frog?" And the grandpa said, "Well, I suppose. I've never been asked that. Why do you ask?" He said, "Well, because Grandma says we get to go to Disney World when you croak." Now you see, words mean different things to different people. And some of our misunderstanding today comes about because we use words to stereotype. I'm a Democrat. Oh boy, then you're a socialist. Then you're an enemy. I'm a Republican. Oh, well, then you're a right-wing lunatic. We take a word and we stereotype with it instead of listening to see what's really behind the word, what it really means to that person. I think we have a tremendous opportunity in this country today to start healing these divisions one of the women I talked to and interviewed for this series that I did for Winnebago, she said, we have to be willing to start talking to each other about the tough stuff. I agree with that. I think all of us need to put on our big boy pants and our big girl pants and start being willing to open up our ears and, more than talking, listen to each other. We are not the enemy. I may disagree with you politically. You may disagree with me. You may be of a different religion or a different faith or no faith. But we are human beings who are blessed to live in this great and free country. We are a part of a human family that, whatever our differences, are united because we are all children of the same Creator. And we have not only an opportunity, but an obligation to bridge the gap, to close the divide, to reach across, to open our ears. It's not only important, and I close with this, it's not only important that we remember the people that have sacrificed, that we remember the great freedoms that we have and how unique they are, but it's also important how we are going to be remembered. Woody Allen was asked when his time came and people walked by his casket, what did he want them to say? And he said, well, I would hope that somebody would say, I think he moved. I interviewed Harrison Ford, who is now, I think Harrison's in his 80s. He's beginning to think seriously about life and the end of life, and I interviewed him at Oshkosh. He was there for one of the big aviation conventions. He's a very good pilot, a very dedicated pilot. And he was asked, how do you want to be remembered? And he said, it would be fine with me if they just said he was useful. That's not a bad epitaph. He was useful. But I will go one further and quote Einstein, the great scientist, who was asked by a student at Princeton, Dr. Einstein, why are we here? And without a pause, he said, well, we are here to serve others. A little kid in Sunday school, the teacher was trying to make that same point. He said, I want to know what the others are here for. But service is more than just an act, it's an attitude. And you people have been fortunate to have had careers that allowed you to serve directly. My father was a minister. He served directly. EMTs served directly. Doctors, nurses. There are many professions for teachers. People have an opportunity to serve directly. But everybody can have an attitude of service, even if they're running a cash register at McDonald's. Whatever you're doing, you can have an attitude. I'm here to serve. I'm here to help. I'm here to be, in Harrison Ford's words, useful. My wife and I had flown our plane down to the little airport in Lake Wales, Florida, where my mother lived, and my aunt, her sister. We landed, we got in the car, we drove past an open hangar, and inside this hangar was a beautiful Beech Baron. I don't know how many of you are pilots, but the Baron is a really beautiful airplane. The guy's spinners were chromed and polished to a fairly well, and I figured he had all of the navigational equipment, all of the stuff you could put on a plane like that. And behind that was a beautiful Class A RV, glistening and polished. And over at the side of the hangar was a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, and all the chrome was just brilliant. My wife said, well, he's got all the toys. And I thought about that as we approached the funeral for my aunt, who had spent 25 years as a medical missionary nurse in Africa. And I thought about the old car she was driving. It was about 15 years old. And I thought about the trailer she lived in. It wasn't a double wide, it was just a single trailer that she was living on in her pension from her years as a missionary. And I thought about what she had left behind, a meager bank account, just about enough to cover her final expenses. But under her bed was a shoebox. And in that shoebox were letters and cards and notes from the African women in the poor villages where she had delivered babies, where she had pulled teeth. Even though she was a nurse, she had to learn to do just about everything medical that you can do because there was nobody else there to do it. I had read some of those messages and those notes and pictures that they had sent her. A lifetime of service represented in that box. And I thought, boy, my Aunt Vera didn't have many toys, but she sure did win. Thank you for your service. Thank you.